Hi, and welcome to SPED 608, Introduction to Academic Instruction and Behavior Management for Exceptional Learners. I'll be your instructor, Dr. Peg McCormick, and this is part 1 of the Session 1 lecture. Here are the essential questions we're going to cover in this first lecture. Number 1, what are the foundational components of special education, and how do those components fit into the general education system? And then in part 2, we'll address these questions. In what ways can the special educator ensure greatest access to the general education curriculum for the exceptional learner, and how essential is the role of the parent in the provision of special education support? Now, by the time you're taking SPED 680, you will have already had a brief course in special education law, so most of you are familiar already with IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But in order for the pieces to connect, and we're going to be talking about how special education and general education connect, it's important that we just go back and review some of the basic tenets of special education and what's required by law. So here you have the basic foundational components of IDEA. The FAPE, free and appropriate public education, appropriate evaluation, the IEP, the LRE, parent and student participation, of course, and procedural safeguards. This is, again, not new to you, but just bear with me as we gather some of what you've already been given to connect with the new information. Next here we have a summary of the foundational components of general education, and you may have already, of course, learned this in your special education law class, but the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 includes accountability for results, school safety, parental choice, teacher quality, scientific research-based methods of teaching, and local flexibility. Now I'd like you to take a look at the general education and special education foundational components as they line up side by side. We can look to the left here, accountability for results, and then look over on the other side to appropriate evaluation, and maybe on the left again to teacher quality, and on the right side, the least restrictive environment. Really, from a universal standpoint, is there anything in either one of these lists that any student should not have basic rights to? From just looking at what all children need to learn, these two lists are really pretty inclusive of a lot of really important foundational principles of education. Now, take just a look at this before we advance to the next slide and see if you can see some connecting points. Here's your take-home point between these two lists. The essential components of special education are designed to ensure that the essential components of general education are accessible to all students. So under NCLB, no school is successful unless all students are successful. So to further distill the point that I'm making, I want you to understand from this point forward through the rest of the lecture that all students, general education students and students receiving special education, both have legal rights to a free and appropriate public education. And all students, general and special education students, need to have access to the same general curriculum. They must have access to the same general curriculum. And that's in the area of the core academic areas are art, health and physical education, language arts, math, science, and social studies. And the only way that this is possible, the only way that we make sure that every student has access to the same general education curriculum is through individualized instruction. And that's where your job comes in. So if we consider the broad range of needs within the learning environment found among children with disabilities and found among those children who are typically developing, it's fair to ask why we should expect students with disabilities to be held accountable to general academic content and achievement standards when the IEP process is supposed to be an individualized education plan. And the answer to this is that the IEP is not a replacement for the general curriculum, nor is it a replacement for academic standards. The IEP actually exists to ensure that students who need individualized services, supports, and specialized instruction get that, and that they are able to access the general curriculum. In order to ensure this legally and functionally, we have system accountability in place. So in a standards-based system, all schools are held accountable for the education of all students. And that system accountability ensures that all students, including those with disabilities, are given the opportunity to learn the general curriculum. So in short, the IEP process and system accountability actually work together to improve outcomes for students with disabilities in the general education curriculum. Next, we ask, how can students with the most significant cognitive disabilities show what they know related to state grade level content standards? In other words, how do they tell us what they know? How do we know what they know? And this is accomplished through the use of alternate assessments. These assessments are based on different achievement standards from the regular assessment achievement standards. They carry expectations that can be defined differently from what is required in grade level achievement definitions. They also carry the essence of the content at grade level. They maintain the essence of grade level content. Alternate assessments are designed with enough flexibility to capture learning in a variety of ways, along with the standardization of procedures to allow comparability. Also, through the support of assistive technology and adapted materials from grade level classroom activities, we're able to ensure that every child has access to grade level content. So to summarize, all of our students with disabilities can work toward grade level academic content standards. To some degree, to some level of mastery, we can expect all of our students to do well when the following three conditions are met. Our students need instruction that is provided by teachers who are qualified to teach in the content areas and by teachers who know how to differentiate instruction for diverse learners. Most of our students will do really well if they have IEPs that are developed to ensure the provision of specialized instruction. We also know that most of our students do really well with appropriate accommodations that are provided to help them succeed in the grade level content. And this is going to be covered more in depth with session 2, but for right now, we're going to end this part 1 of lecture 1. This has been a summary of several things that you've learned in the courses that you've already worked through in your program, and now we're ready to move forward and talk more about instructional delivery and different techniques for classroom management. This slide begins part 2 of our lecture for session 1, and we're going to cover these next two questions. In what ways can the special educator ensure greatest access to the general education curriculum for the exceptional learner? And how essential is the role of the parent in the provision of special education support? First of all, supplementary education, specialized instruction takes time. So we need to ask how it is that IEP teams are supposed to set priorities for student instructional time in a standards-based system. We know that most general education teachers really struggle to cover all of the content and all of the curriculum that they're expected to present to students. And then on top of that, if we look at the specialized instruction, the pull-out time, the remedial work that special education students need, how are the IEP teams supposed to account for all of that extra time? And so what needs to happen is that there's a prioritization determined to maximize the amount of time that any teacher or a set of teachers has with any one student. And some of the challenges that they deal with when planning for specialized instruction is that The academic content standards in the general education curriculum are challenging enough to begin with even for typically developing students. So the content standards are unrelenting in what they ask of students from year to year, from grade level to grade level. Also, every disability has its own specific and unique need that needs time for to be addressed and to be remediated or to be habilitated or to be supported. So it's time needed on top of time needed for typical and special instruction. The other thing they deal with is that decisions made at any one point in favor of one content area might limit options provided or available in other content areas at any future point. So I have an example on this slide that we might have a student who's pulled from science class in 5th grade to work on reading and maybe word attack skills or fluency, comprehension. And so the time that he spends getting the specialized reading instruction then makes it difficult for him to be able to move forward in science content for 6th grade because of what he's missed. So there isn't an easy answer to this, but there are some ways to approach this issue, and we'll continue to look at that. But those are some of the things that we deal with as special education teachers related to finding time to do everything that needs to be done in the student's day. In order to set priorities for student instructional time in a standards-based system, IEP members have to have a comprehensive understanding of the scope and sequence of content across grade levels as the team considers its choices. The content area in grade levels builds. One year builds off of the next year, which builds off of the next year. And so if there isn't enough time to do everything, the IEP team needs to know what can be eliminated and what must be retained so that the scope and sequence doesn't get so interrupted that students then have gaps in their content knowledge, which does impact results of assessments, which does impact the kinds of electives that they can take on in secondary level schooling, and it does create quite a difficulty in their ability to participate in the mainstream if there are significant content gaps. So one of the ways that they deal with this is to bundle multiple priorities. For example, a student could work on reading skills within the context of science with support from both general and special education teachers through vocabulary, word definition, and sentence construction and comprehension work. We know that the standards-based curriculum without support, and on the other hand, a fully remedial curriculum without the scope and sequence of standards-based curriculum one is never sufficient without the other. And so we need both to promote student success in the standards-based system. So we have to approach this issue comprehensively and understand that the educational planning has to consider continued access to both. We need high quality standards and supplemental remedial instruction to address student deficit areas. We have the best chance to ensure access to the general education curriculum for the exceptional learner through the use of scientific research-based instructional methods. This is great because we know this stuff works. It's research-based and we don't have to reinvent the wheel to improve on it. In these next few slides, we're going to be talking about 4 different types of instructional delivery: direct instruction, tiered instruction, co-teaching, and universal design. Direct instruction is the most commonly used form of instructional delivery. It's what most of us are familiar with. It's direct instruction, looks like school, sounds like school. Eyes are forward, bodies are forward, attention is fixed forward on the teacher, and the teacher is the one that's giving the instruction and the direction and modeling and demonstrating the steps needed to accomplish a particular academic task. Direct instruction is specifically designed to enhance academic learning time. You get a lot done in a short amount of time, and it takes learners through the steps of learning systematically and helps the learners see both the purpose and the result of each step. Direct instruction is the method of delivery that most often assures that students are going to be able to use their time best and learn the most in the shortest amount of time. When teachers use direct instruction, they can be seen setting clear goals for students and making sure that those students understand the goals of the learning process or the assignment for that day. These teachers will be seen presenting a sequence of well-organized assignments. They give their students clear, concise explanations and illustrations of the subject matter. In direct instruction, teachers ask frequent questions to see if the students understand the work, and they give their students frequent opportunities to practice what they've learned. Now, in this slide, I've given you a link so that you can click here and see what direct instruction looks like. Next, we'll talk about tiered instruction, and this is an instructional strategy that allows the teacher to divide the class up into mixed ability groups, allowing them to access the same content and objectives during a lesson, yet approaching those concepts at their own different ability levels or challenge levels. For example, a student who struggles with reading still needs to make sense of pivotal concepts in a given chapter or story, but the way that student responds to the teacher through assessment or through the completion of an assignment, or the way that that student takes in the text, perhaps the reading will be presented at a different lexile, different reading level, that differs from the advanced student that's sitting across the room in another group of students that really require a genuine challenge in working with the same concepts and principles, and they are going to be expected to perform at a higher level. So in this way, everyone has access, here again, to the general curriculum, and they're able to perform, take in instruction, and give feedback in their own specific ability levels. As we move forward talking about tiered instruction, I wanted to put a slide in here to be sure that you understand that there's a difference between multi-tiered instruction, which is the tiered instruction that we just spoke about, and RTI. This is, both are going to, they're conceptualized quite the same, and I'm going to show you a diagram in another couple slides here. But multi-tiered instruction is a system of organizing general education curriculum and instruction to meet the needs of all students, and it integrates supplementary supports in order to use resources more efficiently. It applies to all students in a school and can exist without using response to intervention. This is something that happens within the classroom, and it's classroom specific, teacher specific. It's good for all students, and it provides levels of instruction so that students in multiple levels of ability can be served within the same classroom. RTI, on the other hand, is an evaluation procedure identified in the IDEA for identifying children as having learning disabilities. RTI helps us to identify students who are not going to respond well even to multi-tiered instruction in the regular classroom. So the multi-tiered instruction is really a first level, a primary type of intervention that is implemented in the classroom, whereas RTI is a whole school, large-scale set of systematic interventions that help to identify children who have learning disabilities. It's a special education procedure that's limited to assessment. We have to use assessment in that identification process. And the RTI applies only to children suspected of having a learning disability, and and it cannot be implemented without without a system in place. And I have an example here, MTI, and we won't talk about that here. But RTI is large-scale, multi-tiered instruction, is classroom and teacher specific. So I just wanted to make this differentiation before we move forward because the diagrams look very similar. So why would we implement tiered instruction? We do it because one type of instruction doesn't fit all. It's not one type of instruction is never going to be appropriate for all students. And we don't have enough resources in our schools to intervene and provide one-to-one help for each child. Also, we miss kids. We miss being able to identify their needs in the classroom, and in the process, or in the waiting process of the child find and assessment and waiting for children to go through the identification process. They're losing important time, and we don't want to miss out on an opportunity to meet their needs at a classroom level, at a very basic level. So the tiered instruction helps to begin to address those learning problems, maybe even as we are considering children for eventual special education assessment. Also, sometimes we wait too long to intervene. Tiered instruction is a way to get in there right now and immediately to be sure that the learning differences of all children are being addressed. I put this slide in here just for your information and for your own interest. If you look at the column on the side here under population, we have 5%, 35%, and 40% of the population. These are the students that may do well with tiered instruction in the classroom even before they're identified with possibly having a learning disability or have a need for special education. In their process of learning how to read, 5% of the children will have a really easy time, 35% will have a relatively easy time, and then, but we look at the 40% that will have a formidable challenge, and they may need systematic and explicit instruction to the right. Systematic and explicit instruction can still be delivered in the classroom through tiered instruction by a very skilled teacher. But you can see from this chart, if we add up the numbers, 5, 35, and 40, we have 80% of our students have a good chance of being reached academically and instructionally through something like tiered instruction. And it's the remaining 20% that may need Title I services or may need assessment and referral to special education. Those are the children for whom reading is most difficult, and they are likely to need intensive, systematic, direct, and explicit instruction. However, the other 80% may do really well with something like tiered instruction. This is just more information for you to support the point I made in the previous slide. We don't have enough time or resources to intervene and provide one-to-one help for all students. And not every student needs to be referred to special education, obviously. We need to be really selective and careful about who the students that we do send through for referral, because many children can be helped and helped well through general education curriculum. Overall, national longitudinal studies show that more than 17.5% of the nation's children will encounter reading problems. And in a school of about 500 students, 400 will do fine with good core curriculum, 75 will need systematic, ongoing, specialized instruction that can be provided through tiered instruction in the general education curriculum. But then there are 25 students in this hypothetical student body of 500 who will need intensive, individualized intervention. And actually, tiered instruction, as students move through those different levels, helps in the identification process when we are considering those who may need referral to special education. Here's a pictorial representation of what tiered instruction might look like. In Tier 1, we want to support and on-level and advanced students through accelerated independent practice. In Tier 2, we work to prevent reading failure by strengthening reading skills for students who need additional practice in essential reading skills. And in Tier 3, these are the students for whom we need to accelerate reading acquisition by providing extended practice to develop foundational reading strategies. All three of these strategies, or all three of these tiers, can be provided within the general education classroom through tiered instruction. And there's a link down here in the bottom that I'd like you to take a look at that will further explain the benefits of tiered instruction. Next, we're going to talk about co-teaching. And co-teaching is identified as two teachers working together with groups of students and sharing the planning, organization, delivery, and assessment of instruction, as well as the physical space. It's an attitude of collaboration and communication, and co-teaching is aimed at enhancing student learning through the benefit of having two teachers present in the classroom. The key to co-teaching is that both teachers are actively involved and engaged in all aspects of instruction. And here's an example of what co-teaching is not and what co-teaching is. Co-teaching is not simply dividing tasks and responsibilities between two people. It's not one person teaching one subject in a topic, followed by another teacher doing the next subject or the next topic. Co-teaching is not one person teaching while the other prepares materials or grades. Co-teaching is, however, collaboration on planning and instruction. It's using a range of strategies to capitalize on two teachers in the same classroom. Co-teaching is about developing and modeling highly effective collaboration and communication skills, and good co-teaching requires an attitude of sharing the classroom and students. Co-teachers have to always be thinking and remembering that they're both teaching. I'm going to give you 8 different ways that co-teaching can be carried out. The first is one teach, one observe. This is when one teacher has primary instructional responsibility and the other one gathers specific observational information on students or the instructing teacher. The next example is one teach, one assist, and it's an extension of the one teach, one observe model, wherein one teacher has primary instructional responsibility and then the other teacher assists students with their work and monitors behaviors or corrects assignments. Another example of co-teaching is station teaching, and this occurs when the co-teaching team divides the instructional content into parts. So each teacher instructs one of the groups. Groups then rotate or spend a designated amount of time at each station with those individual teachers. And there are often independent stations set up that are used along with the teacher-led stations. In another way of carrying out co-teaching, we have parallel teaching, and this is where each teacher instructs half the students. The two teachers are addressing the same instructional material and presenting the same material using the same teaching strategies. And the greatest benefit to this method, though, is the reduction of the student-to-teacher ratio. Further, another co-teaching strategy is supplemental teaching, and this strategy allows one teacher to work with students at their expected grade level while the other teacher works with other students who need the information and materials retaught, extended, or remediated, somewhat what we were talking about in the tiered instruction model of instructional delivery. And then we have another example of alternative or differentiated teaching, and this provides two different approaches to teaching the same information. The learning outcome is the same for all students, but the avenue for getting there is different. Good team teaching incorporates well-planned, team-taught lessons and exhibits an invisible flow of instruction, kind of this seamless partnership with no prescribed division of authority. Co-teaching uses a team teaching strategy where both teachers are actively involved in the lesson, and from a student's perspective, there really is no clearly defined leader, because both teachers share the instruction and they're free to interject information and they're available to assist students and answer questions equally. Solo teaching, our last example, is when the teacher candidate is the lead planner and teacher for the lesson, and the lesson is specifically designed for only one teacher. But there is a cooperating teacher there in the room, mentoring and providing support to the teacher candidate. I have a couple of links here for you that I'd like you to take a break and look at these videos. The first one will give you examples of 5 different types of co-teaching in action. And then there's another really good supplemental video right underneath that. And this is about 8-9 minutes of video that will just kind of enhance what we've covered in the last few slides. As we talk about instructional delivery and equal access to both special and general education, we're talking a lot about what happens in the school with teachers and students in their interactions. We also need to be sure that we talk about and address the critical role of parents in the special education process. By law, they have rights to be part of absolutely everything that happens in their students' education. And one of the IDEA's foundational principles is the protection of parents' rights to participate in educational decisions that affect and impact their children who have disabilities. The law is very specific about what school systems have to do to ensure that parents have the opportunity to participate in the educational process of their children and the programming if they so choose. Parents have specific rights that are protected by law, and they can be summarized as followed. Parents have the right to participate in meetings related to the evaluation, identification, and educational placement of their child. Parents have the right to participate in meetings related to the provision of a free, appropriate public education for their child. Next, parents are entitled to be members of any group that decides whether their child is a child with a disability and meets eligibility requirement for special education and related services. Parents are entitled to be members of that team, the team that develops, reviews, and revises the individual education plan for their child. And if neither parent can attend the IEP meeting, the school has to use other methods to ensure their participation, which includes individual or conference calls. And furthermore, parents are entitled to be members of any group that makes placement decisions for their children. If neither parent can attend the meeting where placement is decided, the school has to use other methods here again to ensure their participation. And that can include individual phone calls, conference calls, or even video conferencing or Skype. We've come to the end now of the first lecture of Session 1 for SPED 608. And in this lecture, we covered these 3 essential questions. What are the foundational components of special education? And how do the components of special ed fit with the components of the general education system? We also discussed ways that the special educator can ensure the greatest access to general education for the exceptional learner, and we did that through looking at 4 different types of instructional delivery, at least three of which maximize the likelihood that a student with exceptional needs can stay in the general education classroom and be served alongside their same-age peers. We also covered the legally protected and very essential role of the parent in the provision of special education support. Thank you very much.